Welcome to the first in a two-part project series benefiting woodworkers fighting cancer. What we're going to build is a rocking horse. It's just a very basic design provided by the folks at Wood Magazine. We have the plan available for you if you want to go to the website. You can go to thewoodwhisperer.com and find the links there, or just go to woodworkersfightingcancer.com and all the instructions will be there for how you can download the plan and build along. Now the idea here is it's a sponsored event, so every person who builds one of these rocking horses and sends me a picture contributes to the cause, because each one of these sponsors is donating $1 for each completed rocking horse. So it's a really cool thing. I'm donating $1 myself, and these companies are matching my donations, and we're hoping to hit our $10,000 goal for the year. So it's going to be a super project. I hope you build along. Let's see what you're going to need to build it.
A 3/4 inch by 20 inch by 72 inch pre-laminated pine panel. I got mine from Lowe's. And a length of 3/4 inch dowel stock. A jigsaw with a fine-tooth blade, a router outfitted with a 1/8 inch roundover bit, and a random orbit sander. A handsaw, a rasp, and your favorite square. A 3/4 inch Forstner bit, a countersink bit, and some screws. A compass and a French curve, and some construction adhesive.
Now before we get started, of course, we have to have our pre-project ritual. It's a tradition here in the Wood Whisperer shop, and this is no exception with this project. Now that, my friends, is what I call limbering up Jersey style. Okay, so when you start this project, you pretty much have two choices. You need to figure out how do you want to get the patterns onto the workpiece, because really you don't want to have to redraw all these things. The work was already done for us. So you have two options. Number one, you could print out the full size, it's referred to as printer-friendly set of plans. Basically what this is a set of 7 sheets of paper that will print out that you then have to organize in a particular order on your workpiece. And you tape them together, and when it's all said and done, you have the final shape. The cool thing is you can just print this out using your home printer or office printer, and it goes on these 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. The drawback is you now have to tape all of these things together, so it's kind of a bit of a pain in the butt that way. But the thing is, make sure if you do this, that when you print out, you set your scaling options to no scaling. You don't want to fit to page or anything like that. Just make sure that it's no scaling, and if you're forced to put a number in for scaling, put it at 100%. You just want to make sure that it's printing raw, and then when it's done, there's a scale on the actual plans themselves, and you can take a ruler to it and double check that it did print at the proper setting. Once you have that, put them all together and you're good to go. But my preferred method is to take the absolute full size plan and take that PDF, put it on a thumb drive, head over to FedEx, Kinko's, Office Max, any place that does large scale printing, and have them print that file out on a 24 by 36 piece of paper. And that's what I have here. So for basically, I don't know, it's going to be between $3 and $5 depending on their pricing. You could have this printed out in one full sheet. It's going to make your life a whole lot easier. So I really, really recommend you go this route instead of doing the home printing route. Because at this point, all I need to do is stick this to the surface and I'm good to go. All right, so that's really the next step, is to take all of our full-size patterns and get them onto the workpiece. Now, whether you've glued up your own boards or whether you're working with a single pre-laminated board like I am, either way, you just want to be strategic so you don't waste material. Fortunately for this, I'm following exactly what they recommended in the plan. So all I need to do is use the diagram in the plan to transfer my drawings and everything directly to the workpiece. So that's the next step. Let's get started. The first thing I want to do is draw the location of the saddle, because that comes first and then the body. So I want to make sure the saddle is in place. And we don't actually have an outline or pattern for that, but we do have a diagram in the plan that we can use to draw this in place. And it's going to be fairly easy to do. So first things first, I want to measure up 7 inches from the edge. And your edge should be in pretty good shape. If it's not, you may want to clean it up a little bit. Mine are pretty good right from the package. So not too worried about that. So I'm just going to set my adjustable square here for 7 inches. And that should be pretty good. Now our length here is 11 1/4. the saddle is going to have a nice little notch here. The way we get that is by measuring in 1 13/16, like so. And we need to go in 1 13/16 from the other end. We also need to measure in 3/4 of an inch. And that's how deep the notch goes. Okay, so now this is a notch that's going to be removed. Now each of our 4 corners gets a nice curve. It's very easy to lay this out. I'll show you one, and it's pretty much the same thing on each of these 4 corners. I'm just going to measure in 3/4 of an inch from the long edge here, right about there. And I'm going to measure over 2 inches from the end grain. And now all we need to do is connect those 2 lines using a curve. And just one of these traditional drafting French curves is really perfect for this. Just a little tip here to make sure that that curve, you can connect those 2 lines with multiple places using the French curve. So to make sure that it's the same on each one, what I like to do is line it up to where I think it looks good. And then I'll just use my marker or a pencil to place little hash marks that show me exactly what part of the curve I use. So no matter where I'm at, I can very easily line those things up. Okay, put that in place. And this does not have to be perfect. This is really just decorative. And there's the saddle. Now before I draw the rest of the pieces, I need to know where the main body piece is going to go. It's a little bit of a tight fit if you look at the diagram, so I don't really want to do my sticking of the templates to the boards just yet. I want to do that all at once. So what I'm going to do here is take my full-size template, drop it on, and I can see through the paper. I can see where my marks are. Get everything approximately located where it's going to need to go here. And then right at the end of the horse, basically, its butt, I'm just going to lift up the paper, take my pencil, and put a mark right at the end of the body template, right here. All right, and that lets me know, even though my template isn't in place, it shows me that I shouldn't go any further past this line. But all this area up here is where I could put the rest of my pieces. And you know what, while we're at it, let's put in some marks for the mane too. That'll give us a real good idea of where those boundaries are. So now right behind the mane, I'm going to draw in one of our saddle sides. We need 2 of these. Basically, it's about 8 inches across, right? So we want to make sure that that 8-inch span fits comfortably in here. Okay, you don't want it to be too close to the saddle, but it is going to curve in, so you should have no problem. And what I'm going to do is make a mark. If this is my 8 inches, I want to make a mark right here in the middle at what would be 4 inches in the dead center. Now I'm just going to extend that line down. Then I'm going to make a mark at 1 3/8 right on that center line here. The plans don't call this out. They say the whole distance is 5 3/8, but I think you need to know that it's 1 3/8 here because that tells you where to place your compass. Set your compass for 4 inches. Okay, we're making basically a circle here with a 4-inch radius. Put the point right at that crosshair. And now draw in your fancy saddle. Now you don't have to necessarily redraw a second one if you don't want to. You could certainly cut this one out, shape it, and then use that as a template for your next one. But I'm going to draw it here just for the heck of it. Remember, you want to make sure you leave yourself enough clearance between the pieces because you got to fit a blade through there. So don't make it too tight. Now let's sketch in the saddle back. I'm going to give myself enough room from the previous piece, from the saddle side, and I'm just going to draw a starting line. And then I'm going to measure in 4 3/4 of an inch from that point. I also want to draw in a center line, which is going to be 2 3/8. And now I can extend that center line up into the board. And now I'm just going to draw a line at the top here, which will represent the top of the saddleback, and that's at 6 1/8. Right there. And now at that 6 1/8 mark, I want to measure down 1.5 inches because this is going to be where I put my compass point to draw the curvature of the top. Now the compass is set at 1.5 inches. Put the point in the crosshairs, and I'm basically just drawing a half circle here. And now all we need to do is connect the bottom line to the point where it intersects the circle. This doesn't have to be perfect. Again, this is one of those things you're probably never going to see it from 20 feet away. The child using it certainly isn't going to be pulling out a bevel gauge, but let me just show you one trick that you can use if you want to be a little bit more picky about it. What you need is one of these adjustable bevel gauges here. Okay, loosen it up, and I'm going to set it so that it intersects with this line and my circle. All right, once you have what you think is the perfect setting, lock it in, and then you could draw your first line. Okay, just flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. All right, and now you could be absolutely certain that those angles are dead on. Now let's work on the front support. I'm going to give myself another starting line, and from that starting point, we're going to measure over 3.5 inches. Now the top of this front support piece is going to be located 6.5 inches up from this bottom area here. So I'm just going to draw a little line up there. We don't know exactly where it's located yet or what this length is, but we're going to draw in some angles that will help us establish that. Now with a protractor, I just set my bevel gauge to 80 degrees, and now I can draw in my two lines here. Flip it, do the other side. Our center support is drawn in exactly the same way as the front support. It's just a few different measurements. You already have your bevel gauge set, so this angle is already established. Just do the same thing we did for this one. With all the drawings done, we can now turn our attention to the patterns. With a big piece like this, it's probably a good idea to cut most of the excess off. It'll just be much easier to work with and a lot easier to locate onto the board. So that's the first step. And I should mention, if you happen to have kids, this is probably a really good project to bring them into the shop on. I mean, you got a lot of cutting to do with scissors, there's pasting to do, putting the templates onto the workpiece, and you're using some very basic tools to do this. So obviously with safety precautions in mind, this seems like a good one to bring the kids in on. Now, here's a quick tip for you as you're cutting out some of these smaller pieces like the ears and the footrests. Some of them will have straight edges, and you're going to reference that straight edge off of the edge of the workpiece. So it's really nice if you can get your cut right along the line. But using your scissors to make a perfectly straight line can be really tricky. So you can make really quick work of it by working, number one, on a sacrificial surface that you don't care if you cut into. Take a nice straight edge, put it right on your line, and then use an X-Acto knife or box cutter, whatever you have on hand, a nice sharp blade, and you can cut that piece right off, and now you know you have a perfectly straight edge to work with. Now before sticking our patterns to the surface, you just want to make sure you double check yourself with the diagram and that you have everything that you need in place. So you have plenty of room up here for our footrests. Remember, you have 2 footrests to do, so you're going to have to print out 2 copies of that, and 1 tail piece, and of course 2 of the ears, and they go down here according to the plan. So really just try and nest things together in a way that it gives you, we'd rather have extra room than not enough. Okay, once you're pretty confident that everything is located in an area where it's not going to cross over to another piece, we could start sticking these to the surface. But before I do that, I'm going to be spraying my material. So what I need is a very basic outline here. I'm just going to grab a pencil. This doesn't have to be perfect. This is just going to give me a general shadow outline that says, keep your sticky stuff within these lines. It's going to be real helpful so we don't have the adhesive going everywhere. To attach our patterns, you could pretty much use any commercially available spray adhesive. Anyone will really do the job. I've got Loctite here. The idea is you spray a nice thin coat on the surface, let it set up for about a minute, and then bring your patterns and drop them onto the surface. This stuff really isn't very good for you to breathe in, so I definitely recommend using a respirator, and if you can, open up some windows, get some good cross ventilation whenever you spray this stuff. So Let me gear up and we'll get started. Now I recommend placing your small pieces first, and this will give you a little bit better of an idea of what to expect on the bigger pieces that can be more tricky. So since I have a nice straight edge on the bottom part of my ear, I'm going to take a ruler and just use that as a rest for placing my ear. Now to position the big guy, I'm going to hold the head back like this. I'm going to fold it back and try to make contact in only a couple places at once. I'm going to do the bottom and the back of the main body piece here. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And now we can sort of slowly unfold it. Like that. Now before we do any cutting, just keep in mind that this area over here is reserved for our second body piece. Okay, I'm going to cut the first one out and I'll show you later how we can use that to cut out the second piece very accurately so that they're exactly the same. So when you're cutting around all of these parts, be real conservative about it because we still need to get something out of this right side. Now all of our cutting is going to be done using the jigsaw. And I want to show you the difference between a very fine cutting blade and a rough cutting blade. This guy here is very aggressive. Look at the big teeth on it. You can see it doesn't have nearly as many teeth per inch as this smaller one does. And the smaller size of this one allows me to navigate tighter curves. So the recommendation generally is to aim for something that's about 20 teeth per inch. I believe this one is 18, so that's close enough for me. This guy is only about 6 or 7 teeth per inch. So that's going to be a much more aggressive cut. So the cleaner these cuts are, the less work we have to do later. Fine-tooth blades are the way to go. Now you want to try and get as close as you can, but you definitely don't want to go over. So, basically judge your comfort level and make sure you don't go too far. Leave yourself a little bit of slack if you need to. You could always sand it back to the line later. And just another quick tip, that spray tends to get obviously beyond our lines here and it's a little bit sticky, and that might make it tricky for the base of our jigsaw to ride along there. So take a little bit of dust from the shop somewhere and rub that into the surface, and that will effectively stop it from being so sticky. And here's another quick tip for you. If you have areas where things are going to get really, really tight, this is a good example, you may have difficulty navigating some tight turns, depending on the size of your blade. So it's not a bad idea to take a drill and just pre-drill a couple of holes. And those holes will actually make it much easier to turn corners. All right, so anywhere, like right in here, it's a 90-degree angle right there. Well, that little hole is going to make that so much easier to turn that corner when the time comes. Now I've got all of my parts cut and sitting here on the workbench, and they all need a little bit of finessing. Not one of them is perfect to the line, and that's just the safe way to go. So I'm either going to sand or use some other tool to bring it back to that line. Now you could certainly sand. I've got my random orbit sander here if I wanted to, and I could take it on that edge. The thing is, when you're dealing with a 3/4 inch thick piece of material, it's very easy to roll it to one side or the other, and you lose that nice crisp edge. So personally, I prefer to use other types of tools for something like this. You could certainly use something like a spoke shave, but I've got this nice rasp here. It's basically a wood file, essentially, that you can just run across the surface, And it's really good for hitting those high points. As you move it across the surface, you'll really feel it snag whenever you're at one of those high spots. And you can carefully work the edge until you're back to the line. And I could do this for all of my pieces. But the one I want to focus on first is the side, because we need to cut another one of these. So once I get this down to my line and it's absolutely perfect, I'll take it over to my remaining cutoff piece and trace around the outside with a very thin pencil, very tiny pencil line, and then I'll cut that second piece out. Once you have your curve looking the way you want it, especially on a big long curve like this, you can then use something like this. This is a flexible sanding strip. Basically, it's just a piece of 1/8 inch hardboard with some shop-made little handles here that were cut-offs from another project. And this side just gets a little bit of sandpaper using pretty much that same spray adhesive that we use for our templates. The good thing is, see how it flexes and conforms to whatever curve you need to sand. This will really smooth things out nicely. Now in these tighter areas, you're gonna have to get creative because you can only go so far with things like a rasp. So what I recommend doing is taking some hardboard or just some very thin stock and using your spray adhesive to attach some sandpaper. Just like with the sanding strip, these little guys are great for getting into these tight areas. So if you need to do flat areas, these are perfect. You may also want to consider taking some dowel stock and just wrapping a little sandpaper around that, and this will allow you to get into the rounder areas, like so. All right, a lot of this stuff really isn't absolutely super critical that it be perfect. Just make sure it's smooth and there's no splintered wood. Ultimately, we're really concerned about safety at this point. We just don't want any rough, splintery wood in these areas. And for areas that are supposed to be nice and straight, like the front of the horse's head, if you have a hand plane, this is a great time to just take a few passes right on the top here. This is end grain, so it's gonna be a little bit rough. And once you're getting, contact all the way across, it's nice and flat, and all of your milling marks and your saw marks are gone. So for the rest of these parts, you're really just going to follow the same procedures. You want to sand, scrape, plane, chisel, do whatever you have to do to get back to your lines. The good thing is most of these parts, especially the ones with the curves, they're not necessarily as critical because these are just decorative elements. And if they're slightly different than one another, is anyone really going to notice if these two ears are slightly off from one another? So it's not too big of a deal. On the parts that have angled cuts, you do want to get pretty close to your pencil line just to make sure that those angles are nice and tight, because these are going to hold the sides together. So that's just something to think about. But just work your way back to the pencil lines and you should be good to go. Now that I've got one side piece pretty much shaped exactly the way we want it, I'm going to take it onto my remaining piece of my laminated board and we can cut out the other side. That looks pretty good. I'm going to take a very fine 5mm lead pencil and trace around, because now I really want these pieces to be as close to each other as possible. And now I just need to cut out and sand this piece so that it matches our first one. And once you have your second body piece cut, it's a good idea to bring these two pieces together. Make sure that the bottom is pretty much flush. Line everything up and just use your fingers. You don't have to be super precise about it, but as long as it's pretty much even on the bottom, then you want to take a look up here at the saddle. And just feel with your fingers and take a look. You want to make sure there's no major discrepancies here, because you're going to be putting the saddle on top of these pieces. So if one is significantly higher than the other, it can really screw things up. So just pay attention to that. And if you need to do a little trim work, go ahead and trim it up a little bit. Mine seem pretty good. I feel like maybe a 1/16 of an inch difference here, and I'm really not too worried about that. The bottom, some of the curvature is not matching up. So I think this is a case where if we just clamp the two pieces together, we may be able to fix this fairly easily. With the pieces clamped together and the whole thing sitting in the vise, I can now actually work on both of these surfaces at the same time. And before, you might recall, I said not to use a sander because it's very easy to roll it over the edge. Well, in this case, we're actually working with two pieces sandwiched together. So now we have twice the thickness, and it's a little bit easier to keep things on track. So I would recommend in this situation, a good option certainly is to take a sander to it. So that's what I'm going to do. Now with our two body pieces still clamped together, this is the perfect time to start drilling through. Now we have our pattern here, and it actually tells us exactly what type of hole we want to put in these particular locations. Frankly, it can get a little bit confusing if you're not careful. So what I've done is I've just marked certain ones with orange marker to show me the two different types of holes that we're going to do, so I don't get confused. You work it out ahead of time and you avoid making mistakes. Now, if you read the text here, it says a 3/8 of an inch hole, 1/4 inch deep with a 5/32 shank. This is what I recommend you do. If you get a counter bore, countersink bit like this one has a stop collar. I picked this one up from Rockler. Basically, you're going to drill through with just the shank of the bit here on some of these holes. But on others, you're going to do a full counter bore. The reason for this is because it just depends on what we're attaching in those positions. For things like the footrest and the ear, the screw is going to come in from the inside of this workpiece. So we wouldn't want to counterbore here, right? All we're going to do is punch a screw through. We'll be counterboring on the other side. So all we need is a shank hole here so that we have that as reference when we flip the piece over and we could do the full counterbore. In other areas where we have pieces that connect the two body pieces together, such as this one here, the screw is going to come in from the outside. So we need the counterbores in these locations, and of course up here as well. All right, so that's what you really want to think about, but this one bit will do everything for you. Just make sure you mark ahead of time and you won't get confused. Now with the clamps removed, I could take the two pieces apart, and before I really go too far with this piece, I just want to make a couple of marks because I want to counterbore before I flip this piece. So the ones that need to be counterbored on the inside are the ears, so I'm going to circle those just for reference. I need to counterbore down here for the footrest. All right, and that should do it. Now, the rest of these holes, they're still not all the way through, so the counterboring has to take place on the other side. But I can't do that if I don't know where those holes are. So here's the strategy. On the counterbored ones, of course, just drill all the way through. All right, you got your counterbore there. On the ones that do not have a counterbore from the inside, I just want to create a hole that is now visible from the other side of the workpiece. So I get the rest of these done. Now I'm going to flip the piece over and mark the locations that receive the counterbores from the outside. All right, these are all support pieces. Those get counterbores, and counterbore here, but ear and footrest do not get the counterbore from the outside. Now this is where organization really counts, because now you need to flip the original piece over and add the counterbores in the locations where they're supposed to be. We haven't done those yet. Now on the outside face of each one of our body pieces, we need to drill a 3/4 inch wide, 3/8 of an inch deep hole, and that's going to take the dowel rod, which will basically serve as the handles. All right, so what I'm going to use is a 3/4 inch Forstner bit, which gives us a nice flat bottom hole. And the hole that's already there, or a little pilot hole, is going to help guide the center spur on this bit. Now, be careful with these things, because especially if you're using a softwood, these can really get away from you. So just hold your drill very steady, and if you have a drill press, it's a good time to use it. That's all you need to do. Now the next thing we need to do is transfer the locations of our holes to the actual pieces that are going to be screwed together. So for instance, we need to know exactly where those screws are going to penetrate into the footrest, because if we don't, it's going to be very difficult to position this in place, and when the screw goes through there, if there's no pilot hole, it could very well split this workpiece. All right, so what you want to do is line it up and just make sure that the workpiece is touching the dashed lines there for reference, and transfer the center line of that hole to your workpiece. And then I'm going to place a mark 3/8 of an inch down, which is pretty much the center point of the workpiece. A 3/32 of an inch pilot hole should do the trick. And you're going to want to follow the same process for the remaining parts of the project. Now there is one more set of holes that we have to put in place, and that's where the tail meets the back support piece. So you should have a center line from drawing it originally, measure up from the bottom a 1/2 inch, place a mark there, and that is where the bottom of the tail is going to start. So where you put these holes is actually not that critical. So I'm just going to eyeball it here. And let's say we'll put one about there, and one about here. And I'm putting marks on both the tail piece and the back piece at the same time. And now all I need to do is put my pilot holes, just like we have with all of our other pieces, in here, so this can accept a screw easily enough. And I've got my marks here, so what I want to do is punch through with the shank. And flip this piece over, and then now we can do the countersink. Perfect. Now the next thing I want to do is clean up all of the flat surfaces, round over my edges using a round over bit, and basically get everything ready for finish and assembly. But of course, here's the bad side of using a stick-on template like this is we have to get this stuff off. So there's a few ways that you can handle it. Let me show you. So certainly one way to do it is to use something like a card scraper, and you could slowly but surely scrape the paper off and expose the glue layer underneath. This is probably what I would recommend for the smaller pieces. It's going to be one of the easiest ways to handle it. It's not a real fun process, but you'll get there eventually. Just get as much of that paper off as you can. Now on a large surface like the horse body, once again, if you are so inclined, feel free to use your scraper. I'm actually going to sacrifice one of my random orbit sander pads, and in fact I always have used ones laying around, so why the heck not use it for something like this. What I'm going to do is sand through the paper. You see, the glue that's underneath will gum up that sandpaper real fast, but the paper on the top doesn't have any glue on it, so I should be able to sand through like I've done right here and get pretty close to that glue layer. And after that quick sanding, you can see it's quite a bit cleaner, and I don't have any of that paper there, but don't be deceived because the surface still has a lot of that adhesive on it. So what I'm going to do is use a little bit of mineral spirits. I've got some odorless mineral spirits. This is that milky stuff that's better for the environment. And I'm going to rub that into the surface using an abrasive pad. And the abrasive pad is what's really going to help pull up a lot of that adhesive material. Probably not a bad idea to spread a little on the surface, let it soak in for a second or two, and then come back and wipe up the excess. All right, now mine's not absolutely perfect at this point, but I gave it some time to dry, and I think any of the remaining sticky parts will come up with the sandpaper. Probably going to go through a couple of sheets to do this, but I think this way is just a little bit faster. Now it's safe to take all of my parts, all of the small pieces, and sand everything up to 220 grit. That'll get us ready for finishing. Now for some of these smaller parts, you're going to have a tough time using something like a random orbit sander, so you may just have to hit those by hand just to make sure they get up to the final grit. Now our faces are nice and smooth, and we still have these really sharp edges. So of course, this is a child's toy. We want to make sure that these sharp edges are gone. A great way to do that is to use a round over bit. And I have an 1/8 inch round over bit in my trim router here. If you have a router table, you could certainly put the bit in there. That'll be just as easy. But I'm going to take this to all of the edges, except for the ones where some sort of joinery is going to take place. So this part of the saddle here, there's really no reason to round that over. Areas, like for instance on these foot pieces, the footrest, Where the footrest meets the body, there's really no reason to round that edge over either, but everything else does get rounded over. Once again, if things are too small to do with the router, which a lot of these smaller pieces are, you're just gonna have to ease the edges with some sandpaper and create that round over as best you can. Same thing's gonna happen up here by the horse's mouth. We can't get a router bit in there, so we're gonna have to do the best we can to match that profile using sandpaper. Of course, our rocking horse needs a couple of handles, so this 3/4 inch dowel rod is perfect. I have a mark here at 3 3/8. I'm just going to saw through. Of course, we need 2 of these. Of course, we don't want to leave these really sharp ends here. One of these is going to go into that 3/4 inch hole that we created in the body, but the outside edge here is going to need a little bit of work just to make it a little more user-friendly for tiny fingers. Just breaking the edge at a 45-degree angle is really all you need to do. Well, I still have a little bit of sanding and rounding over to do today before I go home, but I think this is a good stopping point. Next time, we're going to cover the assembly. We're going to do some pre-finishing because it's going to be a lot easier to finish this stuff before we put it together. So finishing and assembly next time. Thanks for watching.
A big thank you to our event sponsors, Wood Magazine, Festool USA, the Williaming School of Fine Woodworking, Lee Nielsen Toolworks, Bell Forest Products, Microjig, and Highland Woodworking. And a special thanks to our individual sponsors Eric Gilling and Joseph Buscemi. If you'd like to build this project or donate directly, head over to woodworkersfightingcancer.com.